Welcome to the Living While Loving Your Child Through Addiction podcast. Here, we focus on self care as we tend to our own lives while also extending love and compassion to our kids. This podcast offers science backed skills to bring hope and healing to your entire family. Today's guest, Jackie Jackson, is a writer, yoga practitioner, and group facilitator with other parents like me. She's certified in the Invitation to Change approach, youth mental health first aid, and brings over 2 decades of experience as a registered yoga teacher and continuing education provider. Since 2001, Jackie has taught thousands of people in person and online, sharing tools for meditation, stress reduction, and lifestyle management. Her training includes comprehensive yoga therapy, trauma informed yoga, and somatic EMDR. She co facilitates year long yoga teacher trainings, leads a cancer survivor program at her local Y, and is a lifelong learner and member of the International Association of Yoga Therapists. She's also the author of Urge Overkill, a story behind breaking free, and her very recently released book, Holistic Trauma Healing Strategies to Integrate the Body, Mind, and Spirit. I'm going to say that again because I messed it up so bad. Holistic Trauma Healing Strategies to Integrate the Body, Mind, and Spirit. I met Jackie about 5 years ago through OPLM when we both worked there, and I helped Jackie facilitate a weekly yoga class, and she did all of the hard work. She was the instructor. I was just there as her sidekick to support her. And this was right after Helena passed away. And one of the only things that I was committed to at that time was going to that weekly class. And I had maybe just a couple of clients, but getting to check in with Jackie every week during that time and do that yoga class with her, it just was so helpful to me during such a hard time. So I have a very soft spot in my heart for Jackie and all of the support that she's given me all of these years. And so I'm so glad to have you on the podcast today, sharing about this wonderful new book that you've written. And thank you for being here today, Jackie.
Thank you for that introduction, Heather. Uh, Working with you was one of the highlights during such a challenging time for myself too, which brought me to other parents like me. And thank you for having me on your show. I really love listening to the episodes of Loving While Living with Your Child's Addiction. It's so well done, and I just really appreciate you, my friend, personally and professionally. So thank you so much for having me today.
So let's start with a little bit of your personal story that you've faced domestic violence, eating disorders, cancer, family addiction, and all those things led you to seeking answers. So how did all of those things play a part in you writing this book?
Yeah, there's a timeline that maybe I'll share here that it kind of started in 2016 after I completed my first book on overcoming domestic violence. I realized that there was still another part of the story to be told. And that book was about enduring and regaining my footing. And also, I wanted to then create a companion book on how to truly heal from the aftermath of that and other traumas. So in my research for the book, I ended up seeking out like, the leading voices with evidence-based practice for trauma treatment and discovered some of the top approaches that are being used around the world now. So in that was the year I went to Kripalu up in Lenox, Massachusetts, and you learn from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He's the, if you don't know him, he's the psychiatrist whose groundbreaking work is the book The Body Keeps the Score. And it shows us how trauma isn't just a mental wound, but it's something that your body carries around with it. And so he talks about and works on the multi-prong approach. And so things like body work, EMDR, calm breath, and how to put it together. So I was really inspired by him. I spoke with the trauma specialist, Bonnie Ramilli, who happens to be my neighbor. She's wonderful, but she supported the families that were devastated by the Sandy Hook school shooting. And she works with 911 responders and also 911 responders too. So she showed me really the depth of compassion, like, and skill to hold space for people in the aftermath of unimaginable types of events. And again, she also you talked about the NIH studies of EMDR, eye movement desensitization, retraining, CBT, DBT, and then mindfulness. So then I ended up exploring the work of Dr. Peter Levine. He is the founder of Somatic Experiences, and this demonstrates how trauma gets stuck in our nervous system when our survival responses get interrupted. And so, like in the therapeutic relationship at the right time, when a person's nervous system is calm enough, they can help to release these stuck responses. And Peter's written dozens of books about that, which like he calls the tiger, freeing the tiger. So it's anyway, wonderful stuff. And from the Dr. Gabor Mate, I learned that, there's these effective treatments out there, but what's missing is a lack of integration, like, and how they're offered. Like too often in my personal and my experience working with others, that we're giving, there's a crisis, someone gets a diagnosis or is in crisis, and we go see specialists with their subspecialties, and everyone weighs in with a piece of the puzzle. And we're left to kind of wade through it all, make sense of it as we're kind of fighting for our lives, while we're fighting with insurance or trying to put it all together. And so when I heard him say that, it was like, ding, that's really what this book is about, is integrating the information and laying it out for people to be able to access it. And I was what I wished I had when I was going through these things. So just to keep cruising along, in 2019, my research became more deeply personal. When the pandemic hit, my son started struggling with addiction, and I found myself in survival mode. I was having nightmares. My sleep was disrupted. I was hyper vigilant, which means in trauma talk of scanning the environment for danger. Like, when's the other shoe going to drop? Like a lot of parents could probably relate to, who might be here today or listening later, that, we're living this state of, nervous system dysregulation or, hypervigilance. So, and I felt disconnected with my spirit as well. So, in my ways to try to support my son, I ended up meeting Casey Ferriello, who started OPLM, Other Parents Like Me, where I got to meet Heather and a ton of other amazing parents who I just adore and have been a lifeline in finding connection and people who get it. So it's been pretty amazing. So um, it's been awesome for me to deepen my own healing work and to support other parents. And so, yeah, this is all about how it's kind of a combination is needed to heal. So we'll be talking about in the book, we might be talking about EMDR, cold plunges. We could be talking about Reiki healing, how it's used at Metro Hospital in Harlem to support, the largely uninsured homeless population. There's so many cool applications of music therapy and so forth. So that's what resonated with me. And I'll finally just wrap that up to say, to answer your question, Heather, about uh, my own healing process, is that after I had like written the book on domestic violence, process it. It was like my narrative therapy. And but then even after that though, I think 2001 is when I got trained for yoga. But when I started doing the body work, the trauma started to come out and I didn't even realize it. I thought I'm fine. And so it was around that time that I started to struggle with an eating disorder. And so I realized, and I write about this in the chapter on the energy centers of the body, that it was all had to kind of, in looking back over it, that it was all kind of like root chakra or safety and survival mechanisms that were out of a little still off, even though I was doing therapy and, and working on myself. And so, really helped me to go in and start practicing all these skills. And so using the EMDR, the therapy, the body work, the mindfulness. So I have to say 24 years of teaching yoga has been a saving grace. Um, it was really helpful for me to kind of come out about, like, this is the first time I've ever talked about the eating disorder, actually. So I was a little nervous to share this today. I think I only dedicated a paragraph or two to it in my book, but I I have a therapist and a husband who I would share this with, and then I ended up going to a yoga training, like a retreat weekend with a friend of mine, and we have having myself kind of come out of the closet and say that yes, this is a challenge for me, really helped to reduce the shame that I had been feeling, and so and when I would have issues later, I'd feel like this kind of return to like, I notice a triggering moment, like I would tell my husband and he would be like, okay. And so as small as that sounds, it's these small shifts that with the holistic integration of body, mind, spirit tools that I have used that have helped me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable and open about the eating disorder. I don't think it's talked about enough. Um, I don't think I've ever shared I struggled with it in high school. And it's been like a lifelong journey to have a healthy relationship with food and my body and all of those things. And I think that so many women can probably relate to that on some level, at least. And so I just want to thank you for being open about that because I know just hearing that somebody else is going through or has gone through something similar helps a person feel so much more normal and and like there's like it's okay, it's easier to be okay with yourself when you know you're not alone in things. So I just want to thank you for being brave with that. And I loved what you shared. It's definitely not talked about enough how trauma does get stuck in your nervous system and that we need that combination of mind body healing. There's so much focus on just that cognitive behavioral therapy or talk therapy where you're just talking through things, but then people still really struggle with anxiety and these really uncomfortable sensations in their body that are really, emotions, but that we don't really understand and they can feel quite overwhelming. So, I've had a similar journey as you have where I've had to learn to integrate all these things too. And it only really happened because I've experienced a lot of different things myself. And I thought at first it was just something that happens with people who are struggling with substance use disorder, that they don't get that continuum of care. And then when I went through breast cancer, I realized, like, oh no, like we have to be in charge of our own healing, that I can't really rely on other people to set this path of healing out for me like I thought that I could. So I've went on my own journey that was similar to yours of learning all of these things. That's why I love that you wrote this book because it's hard or nearly impossible to find everything brought together in one place the way you have in your book. So and I know that a lot of parents struggle with this as well. Like it's overwhelming. They don't know where to start. So you mentioned that you kept seeing a lot of different experts. You didn't feel like anybody was helping you put it all together. So can you kind of explain that idea of how you realized I need more than one form of healing here.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think I mentioned also a cancer diagnosis myself. I think it was 2012 for me. Um, in working with, you know, cancer survivors and other parents like myself, and some of these shared experiences. I I remember, seeing all these different experts, and I think that Oprah said it succinctly that we really have to be our own advocates in this process. And I I think that's intuitively what I was feeling. But I think collecting like opinions and protocols as I was writing this book, I was still feeling a little fragmented. And so the turning point was like, I was thinking, well, how do I listen to my body? And so for me, I think that's what led me to the somatic EMDR training, because I liked even putting those two modalities together and saying, like, what are my triggers telling me? Like, for example, I learned that, when I felt anger, a boundary is being crossed, or if I was jealous of someone, which is embarrassing to say maybe, but honestly, I feel like when I can tune in and allow myself to feel the feelings, it shows like when jealousy might be someone's doing something, I'm like, I want to do that too. So it's just can be really helpful and to use these skills. Another one is self-compassion. There's a Dr. Kristen Neff out there who's in the book. He does a lot with self-compassionate mindfulness and says, it's like watching our thoughts. And so all of these things, listening to the body, not just the external experts, the healing was starting to unfold when I stopped like outsourcing and began weaving together the different modalities: therapy, yoga, somatic practice, spiritual connection, into something that worked for me. And it's going to be individual, like we say in the craft or the invitation to change. There really is no one size fits all. And so people can, if they resonate, whatever their belief system is, if they find what spirituality is a anchor for them, great. Then they can start to use that. And so I just like to put, I find that because having written this and and learned from about these evidence-based practices, I use them throughout the day. I'm using affirmations when I wake up. I like to sit over here at my meditation stand and drink coffee and use my affirmations, my spirituality. My son really uses the 12 steps. That has been helpful for him. And so, yeah, it's a integration. And I would also just put in here for a moment that, you know, there's such broad applications for this. It's like it's estimated that in the United States, there's about 70% of all Americans will have had a traumatic event in their life. That's 223 million people. And so people can and do get better all the time. So, we have right now 23 million Americans in addiction recovery. So, for my son, he now has 2 years sober, and so there's like this work doesn't have to be all dark. In fact, I hope it's about lightening up a little bit, finding things throughout the day that help us to like lighten up a little bit. Like maybe it's putting your hand up. This is one I use from self-compassionate mindfulness, like putting the hand on the chest and be like, "You're doing a good job." I tell myself that. Kristen Neff teaches like the face cup. Peter Levine does this little, or this is called containment, a little hug throughout the day. So just to talk about ways you can do it. So
Yeah, I think that those emotions that you mentioned when you first started talking, like about how anger is a boundary being crossed, or that jealousy is like, oh, this is something that I want to do. I think we miss out on that idea that each emotion we feel is a message. And it's telling us something important about ourselves. And that's how we get to know ourselves better is by listening to those messages and tuning into them instead of trying to turn them off because they feel uncomfortable. And, you mentioned self compassion and going into any kind of work, especially this kind of trauma work or anything like that, having that self compassion makes it easier. We need that as a partner with us through the process. And you mentioned that putting your hand on your heart. I do that a lot. And, just to acknowledge, like, yeah, Heather, this is really hard right now, and that's okay. And it's amazing what a small thing that is. It's just that comfort and those other things that you mentioned. And I think it's important to talk about what trauma is, that it doesn't always look like a crisis, because that's something I really struggled with when Helena started struggling with substance use. I didn't understand trauma. In my mind, it was only like a veteran coming back from a war having PTSD. I didn't understand that there were all these other things that my daughter had experienced that were trauma. And you mentioned like these everyday things that ways that trauma might come out. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So just to define it, as I did in my book, is that trauma is subjective, and it's considered any event that is overwhelming and gut wrenching to us as individuals. So, for example, there could be two kids in one family who experience the same event. One may be traumatized and one may not be. So it is very subjective, but whatever overwhelms our nervous system is and can so it looks like stress can tend to resolve after an event passes, but trauma like what was lingering, um, it lives in the body and shows up like in these kind of hidden ways. It could be like anxiety that doesn't go away, people pleasing at the cost of our own needs, chronic exhaustion, or just feeling disconnected from ourselves. I think Bessel van der Kolk says that well. He says, when there's trauma, the head goes up in the clouds, but the body keeps the score. So we have to get back in the body to heal. And so one of the number one ways to create conditions for healing is to find a sense of safety. And I think I should repeat that because like I think was a theme throughout this whole book and my own journey. And when I saw how when my son was in crisis, it was all about safety, and him trying to find safety or me trying to find safety. And so the thing I learned is that trauma leaves this like an imprint that keeps playing over and over. In the neurosciences, like the amygdala part of the brain is like firing off. That's the fire alarm, and it's telling us that there's danger. And so it doesn't always turn off. But to quantify just a little bit that PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, um, is a mental health condition that's triggered by some sort of terrifying event. And the symptoms might be things like flashbacks or nightmares or, severe anxiety, as well as like uncontrollable thoughts about the event. Um, and that's from the Mayo Clinic. But it's not to diagnose, but to highlight the prevalence of PTSD and also what's called post-traumatic stress, PTS, which is common. It's like a normal, and it's often an adaptive response to experiencing a traumatic or stressful event. And it's not classified as a disorder, so, or a mental illness. And I don't love that title, but that's just like the science that's like, in the book there. But the point is, I hope to reduce the fear factor around it because it's just that trauma doesn't likely go away if it's not like identified and dealt with. So again, there's really no one size fits all solution. So I hope to share an exploratory approach to recovery. But a common sign of healing, to go positive here, is that you'll see throughout my work in this book is that It's when you realize you did the best you could in a tough situation and that you now feel safe and like the trauma's behind you. And since I brought up the amygdala, I'll mention um, that the hippocampus stores the memories, and then it's the prefrontal cortex that is like the adult in the room that helps us to feel calm. And so that's some of the neuroscience behind that.
I love that. I've never heard it put that way, but I might steal that the prefrontal cortex is the adult in the room. I usually just say that's the thinking and reasoning part of your brain, but I think that's even easier to relate to that that's the adult in the room. I love that. And you've mentioned safety several times, and I agree with you how important that is, that I know that I didn't realize how unsafe that I felt. I wouldn't identify it because it was just a constant feeling that I carried with me. And that something in, working on myself and then working with parents, I've realized just that one thing alone, if you know how to create a sense of safety for yourself, it can bring you back to the present moment and, you know, bring the adult back in the room. You can get your prefrontal cortex
Mhm.
back online to be able to work through a situation. So I appreciate that you keep bringing that up because it is really important. And I think we need help identifying when we're feeling unsafe. And I like that you mentioned that it's a very personal experience that two people could experience the same event and one be traumatized and the other not be. And that doesn't mean anything is wrong with the other person. It just means that their brain and body processed things differently. It's just different. And, I dealt with flashbacks like a year after Helena passed away. I started getting flashbacks about getting the call. And thank God I knew what was happening, even though I don't think it didn't make it any easier, but I knew what I needed to do to get help to work through it. And luckily, a couple of sessions of EMDR and it stopped. And so I think that's why it's so important to talk about these things and get this information out in the world. That's why I love this book because there's so many things that people are struggling with, but they don't understand what's happening. It just feels like something is wrong with you. So talking about why somatic healing, what it is, somatic healing, and why that's needed along with talk therapy. Because I'm just going to say that I got really lucky that I found a therapist that did somatic therapy with me. I didn't know that that was what I needed, or I didn't even know that that's what we were doing at the time. But we, started working on what was happening in my body and doing EMDR, and that just really helped me understand things better. But I just got lucky. Most people, they go to get therapy and they're like, what's wrong with me that this isn't working? I've been doing it for years. So why is that somatic piece so important?
Yeah, and then I'm just want to take a moment to hold space for you, Heather, having been what you've gone through, and all the parents out there that what a challenge this journey is, and so the somatic experiencing helps us to renegotiate the survival patterns in our nervous system so the nervous system can stand down, so to speak. So the idea is that the body mind connection's natural, like we're born with it. The trauma interrupts the connection by making the body feel unsafe, and the work is to try to restore the safety to the body so that we can come back into it fully and be okay with these sensations. I know for me, I think that kind of contributed to, feeling unsafe, to being like maybe with what turned into an eating disorder, or chronic stress might have brought down the immune system, and that can be the case. There is evidence to that. So, but I just think that this idea of for the EMDR, this one, if I could talk about that too, because I like them together, the somatic, um, is that the EMDR is so interesting because there was an NIH study done by Bessel van der Kolk and a team, And it's funny that if people aren't familiar with it, the eye movement desensitization and retraining, it can be like visual side to side. It could be kinesthetic tapping with paddles. People can do it tapping their shoulders and stuff like that. And we could practice that if everybody wanted, um, but it works like REM cycle of sleep. It sounds like what they think is happening at this time is that as the eyes go back and forth, this helps to activate the hippocampus connection so that it moves the memory to the back or to the past, I should say. Not literally, but from the amygdala's firing off, the hippocampus is the memory storage, so it gets time stamped in EMDR, and then it becomes a more distance, like that was my experience. And then the prefrontal cortex has a chance to reason and to make sense of it. And where you could be like, well, there could be some meaning making even out of that, which is a step forward in healing. So, so it's just this whole connection with the body and being able to tolerate its sensations. I'll just share one more Bessel van der Kolk quote is that he did another study with NIH where he found that um, trauma informed yoga, it was more effective than medication in bringing calm to the nervous system. Now, that doesn't mean you would not take your medication. It means you use all the things at your disposal. Like, I feel like if you're fighting, when we find ourselves fighting for our lives or a loved one, we want to use everything we can. So I'm all for, these two things coming together. Talk therapy is a great narrative, but if we just keep talking and we don't work on processing it in the body, then that can be re-traumatizing. So it's really great that you, Heather, could share that you happen to find this EMDR therapist who also did somatic work, and I've got lucky with that too. But I do remember when my son was going through treatments, um, multiple treatments, centers, and it was frustrating because I was here writing this book, and then he was diagnosed with PTSD, but it was only talk therapy, and I kept trying to advocate and be like, where is the other part? And so it could be hard when you don't see that happening. And so but there was yoga and there was some stuff, but it's tough as a parent, isn't it, when you're trying to advocate for the body and how to integrate it. So but I found that to be really helpful together. Finally, I'll just mention for me, EMDR, when I would go in, I like to have a list of things I wanted to work on, that things that kind of I could never put to rest or just still could be triggered. So it was when the eye movement would happen, these memories would jump across timelines. And usually they go back to some time when I was a little kid. And it was interesting how that you can see the neural pathways of the connections, which is literally what's affecting the neuroplasticity of your brain, which is amazing. And I did actually feel that, and I'm glad you found relief too. That it did help move things to the past. I'm like, yes, that happened. You know, like, I remember my body shaking uncontrollably when my son had a crisis, and I was scared. I didn't know what that was, but Peter Levine would say, "That's your body releasing it, and shaking out is actually crying, shaking, yawning, all the things your body wants to do to heal." But we kind of push it down, or sometimes we feel like, let's just binge watch a show or have a drink or take a pill or whatever. So letting this, in small bits. And that's where these little changes throughout the day or the little things that you can find, little tools so that, we don't want to overwhelm our nervous system when we're having a hard time. So just little shifts.
Yeah. So that somatic healing is that mind body connection. And a lot of times these sensations that we experience in our body are so uncomfortable to us that we disconnect from it so that we don't have to feel it. And that's where, all of these things we do to cope, like maybe drinking, using substances, some unhealthy eating patterns, shopping, whatever it is, that those are the things that kind of keep us disconnected. And but they're the only way that we know how to cope with this discomfort. And so I think that it's really important to talk about how complex this is, that getting back into your body is offers such an opportunity for healing. And EMDR, for me, like you mentioned, I feel like it was kind of like a filing cabinet exploded in my head, and my brain couldn't access the files that it needed to. So I kept repeating this one that it had deemed very important. And I felt like EMDR helped me to take that filing cabinet and put everything away neatly and orderly. And then that was just how my brain felt again. I think that like I like a visual way to remember things. And then I was able to be more comfortable with those sensations in my body and realizing that um things like I felt a lot of sometimes it would be like physical pain would be a symptom of that I had trauma in my nervous system and, headaches. What are some things that people can look for to help them identify that there is trauma in their body?
Yeah, that's such a good point. It could feel like in your body, tightness in the chest, chronic tension in the shoulders, digestive issues, fatigue, that feeling of feeling numb or shut down. Um, for parents, that hypervigilance, it can be the sleep disturbances, digestive issues. Um, if the mind is racing with thoughts and overthinking, and it affects the heart with grief and fear and sometimes emotional numbness. And it can kind of build quietly day after day, but chronic stress and unaddressed trauma can have far-reaching and significant negative consequences mentally, physically, and how we interact with people, emotionally, and our overall life functioning. So if we can kind of find some of the signs and, use our tools, then people can and do heal from trauma all the time. And that's like that whole post-traumatic growth.
Yeah. Um, and I wish that we had more time to talk about that because I did a podcast episode on it one time, but that we can emerge from these traumatic events even stronger than we were before because of all the growth and healing that we do to overcome and integrate these experiences, which I think is gives a lot of hope because a lot of times parents will say to me that they just feel broken and that they're never going to be okay again. And not only can you be okay again, but you can be even stronger than you've ever been. And I think that that's something really hopeful for somebody to know that this doesn't define you. You can learn and grow from this and be stronger than ever.
Thank you for saying that because I would love to leave a message of hope because um, it's interesting that, like, I'm having a moment because I have so much thoughts about that. But the healing is, it's not linear. It can be look like cycling over the same, it's like a spiral. We might like feel like we're circling back over, an old issue, but from a higher vantage point, we can see, oh, I've come this far. But the post-traumatic growth is really this possibility that healing doesn't just bring us back to baseline, but it can maybe even, doesn't have to be, but it can deepen our compassion, our resilience and purpose. Trauma can kind of break us open, but in the opening, we might discover strength and meaning that we didn't know we had. So this idea of post-traumatic growth is like a positive change that can emerge from facing trauma. It's not about like romanticizing pain, but recognizing that healing can expand your capacity for joy and meaning and connection. Um, Emotional resilience is built the same way that a muscle is. So consistent, intentional practices like grounding and self-regulation and supportive relationships and healthy boundaries. Um, those are a possibility. And some of the ways that we can kind of foster it as parents who might have brought you here today is that, this idea that self-efficacy, buffers some of the trauma symptoms that like we can kind of rebuild our confidence in our ability to cope. I know for me, when I was going through the throes, it was one thing when I was trying to work on myself, but when I was trying to help save my son, it was important, I think, for parents to learn to trust ourselves in these small ways and find safety and trust our instincts, even though it's a challenge that I wouldn't wish on anybody, trying to go through this. But the self-compassion is a way to self-compassion is a pathway to self-trust, to learning to kind of, this be mind gentle with ourselves. um, there's higher levels of self-compassion are linked to greater post-traumatic growth. So this process of experiencing like positive psychological change. And it also helps us just regulate our emotions and reduces the self-judgment and the finding some meaning. Oh, and this was the thing I was spacing out on. I wanted to say that you're not broken. We're just buried beyond, like underneath strategies, survival strategies that don't work, and that our healing, well-being is our natural birthright. And so it's not about fixing someone being broken, but just casting off these strategies that aren't working anymore to connect to our whole self beneath.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that because I really don't like the word broken, but so many people use it to describe how they feel. And I think it's important to honor that that's really not the case. We're just going through something incredibly difficult that some people might not ever experience. And I could talk about this all day, but we're running out of time. So if you want to know more, you're going to have to buy Jackie's book. And there's a couple of stories in there about me and some of my healing experiences. So, things that I don't think I've ever really shared before. So, you'll get to read about that in there. And then, so Jackie, where can people find the book and connect with you?
Yes, well, I'm holding it up, but if you happen to be on a format that can see it, here it is. Holistic Trauma Healing: Strategies to Integrate the Body, Mind, and Spirit. It's through Llewellyn is the publisher. So I'll share the links. You can buy it through Llewellyn or through Amazon, although there's a little backup right now there. Barnes and Noble, there's like 7 different places are on the author page, so I can share them with Heather to put in the show notes. But or if you want to sign up for, I do have a little something else I wanted to share for you all out there, and it's a personalized like a healing toolkit, a little resource for parents living with children and addiction, and it just goes through the body and puts out like just nervous system supports and grounding the mind of reframing. And it just lets kind of guide you through some practices, which is something that's in the book. So in the back are the resources of the evidence and the studies on which these practices are based. And then in each chapter, you have a chance to do free practices so that you can, DIY it. And you can be like, okay, this meditation or this strategy is associated with EMDR, or this one's with CBT, or this one's with yoga. And then it just goes on. So it gives you a chance to just kind of, work with the material and see if it works for you so that you can, build your toolkit. So, uh,
Yeah, I'll put all of those links in the show notes. And yeah, Jackie made this nice little guide for all the listeners, and there'll be a link so that you can download that as well. And thank you for being here today and sharing everything about your book, Jackie.
Thank you so much, Heather, and to everybody out there. This was really lovely to see you again. You're doing amazing work, and I just appreciate all the parents out there on this journey and send you a lot of love and support. Thank you.